The air in the sleek downtown Atlanta condo felt cold. Not just from the polished marble floors or the high-rise breeze whispering through the glass balcony doors, but from the tension thick enough to choke on. Malik Carter stood near the floor-to-seat windows, cuffing the sleeves of his custom-tailored suit. Every thread screamed success. The reflection looking back at him from the city's glittering skyline was the man he'd worked tirelessly to become. Behind him, Imani Rhodes sat on the edge of the leather sofa, clutching a half-empty mug of herbal tea gone cold. She wore a soft, oversized sweater, her natural curls pulled into a loose bun. Her silence filled the room louder than words. "It's just not working anymore, Imani," Malik said. His tone was calm. Too calm. Like he'd rehearsed this moment down to the syllables. "We've grown apart." Imani didn't respond right away. She stared down into her tea, as if the answer might rise up from the steam. 14 years, Malik. You don't just walk away from 14 years like it's a bad lease. Malik finally turned to face her. His eyes didn't soften. Instead, they scanned her face like he was auditing an outdated investment. No makeup, no jewelry, no labels. Just the woman who had stood beside him since freshman year at Howard. "We want different things," he said. "I'm about to make partner at Bravestone Holdings. My life's accelerating. I need someone who fits that pace." He didn't have to say the rest. Imani wasn't that someone. Imani used to be a rising voice in Black cultural art history. A curator known for unearthing forgotten stories and bringing color to silence. But when Malik's financial career took off, she dimmed her own spotlight. Late-night dinners for his clients, solo weekends while he flew cross-country, managing their household down to the last throw pillow, she gave all of herself so he could climb higher. She thought they were a team. To him, she had become a weight he couldn't carry into the next phase. "So, all that time I spent holding things down while you chased your dreams," she said, her voice catching. "That was just dead weight to you." "It was a different time," Malik replied, waving it off like a smudge on his cufflink. "We were kids. You've settled. You've single quotes, comfortable. I can't be with someone who's standing still." That one hit like a gut punch. He had taken the piece she'd built, her love of books, her slow mornings with tea, her quiet joy, and called it a weakness. The divorce moved fast. Malik's legal team, sharp and polished, carved up their shared life with surgical precision. He let her keep the old checking account and her share of their starter condo in Decatur. A laughable portion compared to his growing fortune. The luxury condo, the car, the stocks, the artwork. All his empire, built on ambition and charm. On the last day, as Imani packed her final box, Malik walked in with Betrayal, the woman who had replaced her in record time. Long legs, Brazilian weave, designer everything, a walking brand deal. "Malik." "Baby," Betrayal said, her voice high and sugary. She barely glanced at Imani. "Are you really keeping this piece?" She pointed at a moody, abstract painting Imani had found at a local gallery and loved for years. Malik chuckled. "If you don't like it, babe, we'll toss it. We'll start fresh." Imani didn't flinch. She looked at him, the man she once memorized, prayed for, fought beside. There was nothing left, just glass and metal. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She turned, box in hand, and walked out. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Tired eyes, slouched shoulders. A version of herself she barely recognized, and for one fleeting, dangerous moment, she believed every word Malik said about her. Imani's new apartment was small, a second-floor walk-up in West End, Atlanta. The building was older, the floors creaked when she walked, and the radiator made weird noises in the middle of the night. But it was hers. There was no concierge, no skyline view, no valet parking. Just cracked sidewalks, old trees with stories, and a corner coffee shop that played jazz on vinyl. The first few months passed like fog. Quiet grief settled over everything. No more dry cleaning, Malik suits. No scrambling for dinner parties. No pretending to be the perfect partner in rooms full of fake smiles and louder egos. Just her. She unpacked her boxes slowly, one by one, like an excavation. Her old textbooks, notes from grad school, faded museum pamphlets. She ran her fingers across the spines of books she hadn't touched in years, each one whispering the name of the woman she used to be, before she became Malik's background. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, she stood staring at the bare walls in her living room, surrounded by unopened boxes, and something clicked. It wasn't a lightning strike. It wasn't some cinematic breakthrough, just a small, quiet decision. She was done being sad. She deserved more than this hollow silence. She wanted to be surrounded by beauty again. The kind she knew, the kind she understood. The kind she used to teach others to see. So she opened her laptop. She didn't touch Malik's money, the settlement she got. She treated it like seed, not survival. That very night, she registered a business name, Rhodes Art Advisory. Her first office was her dining table. Her first client, a college friend who had stayed in the art world and remembered Imani's gift for spotting pieces that spoke louder than price tags. Work started slow. She advised young collectors with tight budgets, helped decorate modest living rooms, found meaning in places other consultants would have walked past. But each time a client hung a piece, she paused. Each time they stood in front of something that moved them, it added a brick to the foundation of her new life. Meanwhile, she couldn't completely avoid Malik. His name lived in the business pages in society magazines. There he was, with Betrayal on his arm. All diamonds and smiles, Malik Carter and Betrayal James light up the Atlanta philanthropy ball. Carter climbs higher at Bravestone Holdings with record-breaking biotech deal. Every headline whispered the same lie he had upgraded. He had won. Imani, by contrast, wasn't in any photo spreads. Her name wasn't trending. Her business barely had 100 Instagram followers. She didn't have millions in stocks or a penthouse with panoramic views. But one day, she stepped back from hanging a bold, soulful piece in a client's living room. The sun hit it just right. The space came alive. Her client clutched their chest and said, "It's perfect. It feels like me." That moment, that feeling, it couldn't be bought. It was hers, and it was just the beginning. Julian Westbrook moved through the world like a whisper, not because he was shy, but because when your wealth is built on generations of silent power, you learn that the loudest man in the room is rarely the one in control. His name wasn't on billboards. He didn't throw flashy parties or chase headlines, but his fingers were in everything: shipping, tech, real estate, private equity, and one of those holdings was a company he barely thought about. Bravestone Holdings, Malik's firm, but Julian wasn't passionate about money. His piece came from a very different place. Art, real art, not the kind rich folks collect for flexing, but the kind that makes your soul go still when you stand in front of it. He never bought based on buzz or market trends. He bought pieces that whispered, "I've lived. I've seen things." He trusted his instincts, and one trusted voice, a museum director, someone he'd quietly supported for years, mentioned her name over coffee one afternoon. "There's a woman," the director said. "Imani Rhodes. Brilliant. Used to be one of my best. Took a long break, marriage or something, but she's back now. Independent, small business, eyes like hers, rare." Julian raised an eyebrow. He didn't react big, just leaned back and nodded. "Set something up," he said simply. Their first meeting was at a coffee shop on Auburn Avenue. No bodyguards, no black Escalade. Just a man in a soft charcoal sweater, jeans, and sneakers. Standing as she walked in, Imani was nervous. She expected some retired hedge fund giant, ego big enough to fill the room. What she found instead was someone still. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, warm but quiet. "Julian Westbrook, thank you for making time." "Imani," she said, offering her hand. His shake was firm, respectful, no pressure, no posturing. He didn't ask for her rates, didn't ask how much she could move in 90 days. Instead, he asked, "What kind of art makes you feel something?" That question, no one had asked her that in years, and for the next hour, the dam broke. She told him about her love for black expressionists, for work that had pain layered into the color. She talked about the rawness of Jacob Lawrence, the fire in Alma Thomas, about how art from the diaspora carried trauma, joy, ancestry, all at once. Julian listened, really listened. No phone, no interruptions. Just him and her, in a little coffee shop, two souls meeting in quiet clarity. When she stopped, almost embarrassed by how much she'd shared, he smiled. "I want a piece," he said. "For my personal study. It's a space I use when I need to think. I don't want silence. I want presence. Can you help me find that?" It was the most thoughtful commission she'd ever received. They started spending time together, gallery visits, private studio showings, cafe tables filled with debate and laughter. There were no grand gestures, just connection. He was unlike anyone she'd known, especially Malik. Julian didn't need chaos. He didn't need to be seen. He just wanted to see. He asked questions that made her pause. He remembered details. When she spoke, his focus didn't drift, and when she mentioned, just once, the marriage she left behind, he didn't pity her. He didn't even blink. She said. "He told me I lacked ambition, that I was too content." Julian looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he turned toward a nearby painting, a canvas that looked like it was breathing, the colors dancing in rhythm. "Contentment," he said quietly, "isn't the absence of drive. It's the fuel. A man who can't sit still isn't climbing, he's running." Imani felt her chest swell, just a little. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to prove anything. She was just seen. What started as gallery visits and quiet dinners became something deeper. Julian Westbrook wasn't flashy. He didn't announce his wealth. He moved like a man who already knew who he was and had nothing left to prove. His world was carved out of silence, subtlety, an unshakable calm. But in that silence, Imani found the loudest kind of peace. They shared late-night walks through small community exhibits, whispered critiques over raw emotional pieces. He didn't care about price tags or provenance. He wanted truth, beauty. Stories. He gave her his trust almost without realizing it. Within weeks, she was managing his private collection, researching, acquiring, preserving. She oversaw framing, temperature controls, insurance audits. But more than that, he let her shape the vision. By stories, he told her one evening, not decorations. Find the voices that never got their shine. That's what matters. He gave her a budget that made her pause, more than she'd ever handled. But not once did he second-guess her choices. He believed in her eye, and he never used her past against her. Julian rarely talked about business. Imani knew he was powerful. That much was obvious. People in high places deferred to him. Doors opened without question, and his phone never rang with nonsense. But he never flaunted it. His name stayed out of headlines. His suits stayed understated. His car, a quiet black electric sedan, was as low profile as it got. He was the opposite of Malik in every possible way. One night, curled up on Julian's soft leather sofa, a documentary flickered across the TV. The story of Jean-Michel Basquiat. Imani rested her head on Julian's chest as he scrolled through a tablet beside her, distracted. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just a quarterly update," he murmured. "One of our portfolio companies is planning a big acquisition. Aggressive deal. Feels off, but it's profitable." She nodded absently. "Which company?" He didn't look up. "Bravestone Holdings." The name hit her like a punch. Her breath caught. She didn't say anything at first, just stared straight ahead. The air in the room shifted. Bravestone, Malik's empire, the firm that had consumed their life, the one he sacrificed their marriage for, the one that had defined his ambition, his worth, his identity. And Julian. Julian wasn't just rich, he owned Bravestone. Not publicly, not directly, but behind the layers of LLCs and holding firms. Julian Westbrook was the final name on the paperwork. The ghost in the machine. The man at the top of the very tower Malik had spent years trying to climb. Imani sat very still. Julian scrolled on, second, unaware of the earthquake he'd just triggered. "One of the execs, Carter, is pushing hard for the deal," he said. Typical shark, probably thinks this will make his career. Imani's hands went cold. Carter, Malik Carter, of course, and now, fate had wrapped around in a perfect, twisted loop. The man who threw her away like she was small, replaceable, had no idea that the real king of the castle was now falling asleep with his head in her lap. The irony was almost biblical. Imani looked down at Julian, his soft breaths, his gentle strength, the warmth in his body that had never asked her to shrink or perform. She should have felt smug, she should have felt vindicated, but instead, all she felt was stillness. Because in that moment, she realized, this was never about revenge, this was about building something real without noise, without spectacle. And now the man who had discarded her was about to walk blindly into the most humbling truth of his life. The news was everywhere. Malik Carter continues to climb the corporate ladder at Bravestone Holdings. Bravestone's CEO Carter finalizes historic biotech acquisition, philanthropy power couple, Malik Carter and Betrayal James at the city's annual charity gala. Malik was winning. At least, that's how it looked on the surface. The glossy photos with Betrayal on his arm, the successful deals, the accolades. He was the man everyone wanted to know. The man everyone wanted to be. But in the quiet spaces, when the spotlight dimmed, there was something he couldn't see. He was running faster, climbing higher. But the ground beneath him had already crumbled. He didn't know that the woman he discarded, the one he thought was beneath him, was thriving. Not only had Imani rebuilt herself, but she was now at the heart of Julian's world. And Julian was no ordinary man. He didn't just have money, he had power, quiet, enduring power that came from decades of investment, growth, and influence. And the world was beginning to realize who Julian really was. The invitation to the annual Bravestone Gala came as a shock to Imani. She had never intended to return to that world. The world of polished shoes and fake smiles. The world where Malik had promised her she was nothing more than a background piece. But Julian insisted. He wanted her by his side. He wanted her to see how far she'd come. He wanted to share this night with her. We'll only stay an hour, he'd promised. But this is important. The board's expecting me, and they need to see we're united. His eyes had softened when he added, and I need my beautiful partner there. Imani didn't hesitate. She said yes. The night of the gala arrived. Imani stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the midnight blue silk gown that fit her perfectly. It was elegant, timeless. She didn't look for attention. She didn't need it. This dress, this moment, was for her. She wasn't Malik's mousy ex. She wasn't the woman who had been too comfortable. This was the version of Imani who had built herself from the ground up, who had poured every ounce of her heart into something real. When they arrived at the Peachtree Tower for the event, the room buzzed with energy. Wealthy suits, private jet owners, corporate sharks. It was a game of status, of who was wearing what, and who had the loudest voice. Malik stood at the entrance, basking in the congratulatory praises of his colleagues. Betrayal clung to his arm like a perfectly polished accessory. They were the power couple, the dream team. But Malik wasn't prepared for what happened next. The crowd parted, and in walked Julian. Calm, composed, a man who knew exactly who he was. On his arm was Imani. She moved like she owned the space. Not in a loud, brash way, but in a way that made the room pause. Malik's glass of champagne slipped from his fingers, shattering onto the marble floor. The whispers started immediately. Heads turned, eyes widened. The energy in the room shifted. Julian and Imani, an effortlessly powerful couple. A contrast to the faked smiles Malik had grown so accustomed to. Julian nodded to a few familiar faces, all while keeping his gaze on Imani, a quiet pride in his eyes. Malik's mind raced. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. How could it be? Who is that? Betrayal asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Her gaze flicked between Imani and Julian. Doesn't matter, Malik snapped, trying to maintain control, but his throat had tightened, his stomach churned. He looked back at Imani, the woman he'd thought was nothing. Now, She stood next to the one man in this room who could end his career with a whisper. And here she was, not as a victim, but as a queen in her own right. As they walked further into the room, Malik couldn't escape the weight of the realization. The man who had rejected her was now nothing more than a footnote in the life she had forged. The life she was now sharing with Julian Westbrook, the one who had truly seen her when no one else had. The gala was a spectacle, a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering gowns, all buzzing with a collective ego. To the world, Malik Carter was still at the top. But in the shadows of his pride, a storm was brewing. Julian's quiet entrance had changed everything. The murmurs hadn't stopped. Whispers of the unknown man who had walked in with Imani Rhodes. Now suddenly the center of attention were everywhere. Julian wasn't just an anonymous billionaire. He was the owner of Bravestone Holdings, the very firm Malik had poured his life into, the one he had sacrificed everything for. Malik watched helplessly as Robert Miller, the CEO of Bravestone, moved forward to greet Julian with a smile that spoke volumes. Robert's face shifted from professional cordiality to something more, reverence. Something Malik never received. "Mr. Westbrook, what an honor," Robert said, extending his hand. His eyes flitted to Imani, and Malik could see the recognition in Robert's gaze. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of Julian's power. Julian, unruffled, shook Robert's hand with a firm grip. "Robert, great to see you," Julian replied casually, his voice calm as ever. He glanced at Imani, who stood beside him, her confidence radiating. "I believe you know my partner, Imani Rhodes," Julian added, his voice carrying easily across the room. The words hit Malik like a slap in the face. His throat tightened. Imani, his ex-wife, was no longer just a piece of his past. She was the partner of the man who held the keys to everything Malik had built. The one person who could undo him without lifting a finger. "Imani," Robert said, his voice stuttering for a moment. "Of course, it's been a long time. It's wonderful to see you here." Imani smiled softly, her gaze meeting Malik's across the room for just a moment. No malice, no triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what had changed, and what had been lost. The night dragged on, but Malik couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes without sensing their judgment. They weren't looking at him like they had before. There was no awe, no admiration. Now, there was only distance. By the time the awards ceremony began, Malik felt the walls closing in on him. The air felt thin. His palms were sweating. As the event's main sponsor, he was supposed to receive the Dealmaker of the Year award, a title that would solidify his place as the face of Bravestone. It was the culmination of all his hard work. All the sleepless nights spent securing deals, fighting for power. But tonight, it wasn't about him. Not anymore. Julian stood from his seat, his calm presence drawing the eyes of every person in the room. The moment he stepped up to the stage, all other conversations died. It was as if the room shifted, realigning itself around him. Malik felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. "Good evening," Julian began, his voice steady, his words clear. "Apex Capital has had a profitable year, and part of that success has come from the relentless drive of one of our own, Mr. Malik Carter." The words felt like they came from another world. "Mr. Carter has worked tirelessly on the biogenics deal, a deal that will bring great short-term success, but one that comes with a cost." Julian continued, his tone measured, his eyes sweeping the room. He let the words hang in the air. "I am proud to announce that the acquisition, while profitable, has exposed the firm to long-term risks. The hostile approach, the aggressive tactics, have created enemies where we could have had allies." Malik's stomach dropped. He could feel the room's attention shift. The polite applause sounded hollow, forced. "This," Julian said, turning slightly to look at Malik, "is a case study of how winning a battle doesn't always mean winning the war." Every eye in the room turned toward him. "True success," Julian added, "is built on integrity, foresight, and long-term partnerships. It is not just about victory. It is about how you win." He paused. "And how you treat people along the way." The silence in the room was deafening. Malik felt his face burn. His hands trembled as he took the stage. The Dealmaker of the Year award, which should have been a crowning moment, now felt like a death sentence. His world was unraveling in front of him. Julian hadn't just criticized his approach, he had destroyed his entire philosophy. Every aggressive decision Malik had made, every ruthless acquisition, was now laid bare for everyone to see. He took the award from Julian with shaking hands, muttering a thank you that barely reached his ears. The crowd's applause was sparse. Hesitant as Malik stumbled back to his table, the weight of the award felt heavier than it had any right to. His career at Bravestone, the empire he had built, was now in ruins. The cheers, the accolades, the power, all of it was gone in a single speech. Scarlett's eyes met his, wide with disbelief. The woman who had once stood by him, now distant and cold, she said nothing. But her silence spoke volumes. Julian and Imani sat together, their chemistry undeniable, as they exchanged quiet words. To the world, they were just another power couple. But to Malik, they represented everything he had lost, and everything he had never truly understood. Malik's mind raced in a haze of disbelief as the night continued. The grand ballroom, once a place where he had strutted confidently, now felt like a gaudy stage where his life's work had been publicly dissected. The scattered applause from his award presentation still echoed in his ears. But now it seemed like a distant memory. He sat at the table, trying to ignore the soft whispers around him. His colleagues who had been patting him on the back earlier in the evening now avoided his gaze. The smiles were gone. Now there were only glances filled with pity that cut deeper than any insult. And then, the moment happened. It wasn't the grand entrance he had expected, the arrival of the man of the hour. No, it was the arrival of someone far more powerful than he could ever imagine. The crowd parted as the heavy doors swung open. There he was, Julian Westbrook. As always, his presence was quiet, commanding without effort. His dark suit, simple yet perfect, cut through the atmosphere like a warm breeze, and at his side was Imani Rhodes, a vision of grace and strength. Her presence radiated like a force of nature. She wasn't the woman Malik had discarded. She wasn't even the woman he had assumed was weak. She was a woman who had become everything Malik had never believed she could be. She stood beside Julian, not as a trophy, not as an accessory, but as a partner, a true equal. It was impossible to look away. It was like watching two worlds collide. Julian, the man with the ultimate control, walking beside Imani, the woman who had quietly rebuilt herself, the woman who had not only survived, but thrived. And the look they exchanged, it was one of calm understanding, of mutual respect, of love. The whispers of the room rose. People were looking, staring, assessing. They knew who Imani Rhodes was now. And they knew who Julian Westbrook was. But what they didn't know was what Malik Carter had just realized. He was nothing. He wasn't even a footnote in the story anymore. Imani glanced across the room, her eyes meeting Malik's. The cold, indifferent expression on her face didn't scream victory. It didn't scream, "I told you so." It was simply knowing. The quiet acknowledgement of what he had done. What he had lost. The truth hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't the king anymore. The empire he had built was crumbling, piece by piece. But what really stung was that he hadn't just lost his place at the top. He had lost the one thing that could have truly anchored him. Iman. He looked away quickly, his mind spinning with regret, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder how long Julian had known. How long had Julian been watching this slow unraveling of Malik's life? And then it hit him. Julian Westbrook had been his boss all along. Not just in the corporate hierarchy, but in the larger game of life. He had been the invisible hand. The true architect of the business world, Malik had spent years trying to conquer. He had thought he could control everything. But Julian had already outplayed him. And Imani had become the one thing that mattered. As the night went on, the world around Malik seemed to blur into a haze. People continued to congratulate him, but their words felt hollow. He was walking through the motions now. a puppet on strings that had been cut. Meanwhile, Julian and Imani moved through the room like a perfect symphony. It was as if they were made for each other, their movements synchronized, their confidence unshakable. They were a power couple in every sense of the word. Imani didn't just stand beside Julian, she stood beside him as an equal. She wasn't his trophy, she wasn't his accessory. She was his partner in every sense. Malik watched them interact, and something inside him cracked. This wasn't the woman he had left behind. The woman he had discarded had grown into something far more powerful than he had ever given her credit for. She was no longer the woman who had held him back. She was the woman who had reclaimed her life, who had found her own power, and who had learned that her worth was never tied to him. It wasn't just a personal loss for Malik, it was a public humiliation. He had assumed that throwing Imani away would make him stronger. He thought he could climb higher by leaving her behind. But now, in front of everyone who had once looked up to him, he realized the painful truth. In trying to leave her behind, he had lost everything. The gala had become a blur of faces and voices, but none of it registered for Malik. His world was collapsing around him in slow motion. The faces, the laughter, the smiles, they were all distant now. Every word felt like it was being spoken from miles away, an echo of a life that no longer belonged to him. At the center of it all stood Imani, glowing in a way he could never have imagined. She wasn't just the woman he had left behind, she wasn't the one who was supposed to be forgotten. She had rebuilt herself, reshaped her world, and stood at the pinnacle of something far greater than he had ever realized. She was happy, truly happy, and that happiness no longer had anything to do with him. And then, as if the universe itself was playing a cruel joke on him, Julian Westbrook stood beside her, unmistakably powerful, undoubtedly secure in his place, with a presence that demanded attention. The man who had quietly built an empire was now standing beside the woman he had once discarded as if she were just a stepping stone in his rise to success. Malik felt like he was suffocating, watching them interact with ease, their connection seamless, a quiet power that reverberated through the room. The worst part was that it wasn't just the woman he had thrown away. It wasn't just the job he had sacrificed for the sake of ambition. It was his entire life that had been built on the very things he thought he wanted: money, power, status. Now those things seemed meaningless. Every time he saw Imani, he saw the life he could have had. The quiet moments, the shared dreams, the love that could have been built on a foundation of mutual respect and partnership. Instead, he had cast her aside like she was nothing. Now, here she was, thriving with a man who truly appreciated her, and Malik was standing in the ruins of his own making. The night ended with scattered goodbyes, empty pleasantries, and the sharp sting of humiliation. Malik's colleagues who had once praised him were now avoiding his gaze. The very people who had been eager to shake his hand and congratulate him on his success were now nowhere to be found, as he drove home in the back of his black SUV. The weight of the evening pressed down on him like a lead blanket. The cold reality, set in Bravestone Holdings, the company he had dedicated his life to, was no longer his kingdom. His career, his carefully crafted persona, everything he had worked for, had just been deconstructed in front of his very eyes. And the worst part, he was no longer the most important person in the room. The people who mattered, the ones who would decide his fate, were no longer looking to him. They were looking at Julian Westbrook. They were looking at Imani Rhodes. The very people he had dismissed as insignificant had become the ones with real power. The next morning was no better. Malik arrived at the office early, hoping to regain some semblance of control over his world. But as soon as he stepped inside the glass and steel lobby, the atmosphere hit him like a punch to the gut. There was a heaviness in the air, a coldness that hadn't been there before. He passed by the front desk, where employees who had once greeted him with smiles now barely made eye contact. The corporate corridors felt strangely hollow. No one stopped to ask him how he was doing. No one looked eager to engage. He reached his office, but the moment he stepped inside, the door clicked behind him, and the walls closed in. The reality of his situation hit him with full force. Robert Miller, the CEO who had once been his biggest supporter, called him into his office. Robert began not bothering to offer him a seat. His voice was clipped, terse. "I'm afraid we're going to have to restructure the leadership on the biogenics integration. Given Mr. Westbrook's feedback, we need a different approach." More diplomatic. Malik's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to protest, but Robert's next words cut him off. "It's not your deal anymore, Malik. We're reassigning it to another team. Your other projects will be reassigned to. We need you to focus on internal strategy. Take a step back. Internal strategy, the corporate equivalent of exile." Malik stared at Robert, his mind racing. His body felt numb. The life he had fought for, the career he had built, was slipping through his fingers, and no one cared. He wasn't even the king of his own company anymore. The foundation had cracked. The weight of the fall didn't hit Malik all at once. It was slow, like water dripping into a hollow space. He walked through the halls of Bravestone, watching the world he had ruled for years slip further from his grasp. And just like that, the empire that had defined his life was no longer his. Malik's world continued to crumble, piece by piece, as the days dragged on. He moved through the motions, his steps slow, his mind weighed down by the realization that he had lost everything that once defined him. But the final blow came on a quiet afternoon, when a single phone call made everything crystal clear. The number on his screen wasn't familiar, but the area code was. It was a number he hadn't seen in months. Not since the day he had turned his back on her. Imani. He hesitated for a long moment, staring at the screen, his thumb hovering over the green icon. Was she calling to gloat, to rub in the fact that she had made it, while he had failed? Or was this just a courtesy call? A final message before she disappeared from his life completely? Finally, he answered. "What is it, Imani?" Her voice was calm, collected, but there was a finality in it that struck him. "I'm at our old coffee shop, Malik. The one near the university. I have something of yours. I'd like to return it." His heart skipped a beat. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice tight. There was no fight left in him. No bravado. Just a sense of resignation that he hadn't felt before. The coffee shop was quiet, as always. The kind of place where students huddled over textbooks, and old couples shared quiet conversations over steaming cups of tea. It was a far cry from the high-end restaurants and the gala balls Malik had grown accustomed to. But it was familiar. It was the place where he and Imani had spent countless hours discussing art, life, and dreams before everything had gone wrong. She was sitting at the back of the cafe, her hands wrapped around a mug. Her posture was relaxed, almost serene, as if she had found a peace that Malik could no longer touch. He sat down across from her, the silence stretching between them. She didn't look at him at first, her gaze fixed on the mug in her hands, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. For a moment, Malik didn't know what to say. But then Imani spoke, breaking the silence. "I didn't plan any of this, you." "No," she said, her voice even. "I didn't know who Julian was in that way until a few weeks before the gala. I never set out to hurt you." Malik's chest tightened. "You could have warned me, Imani. You could have told me." "I didn't." "No. I didn't know he was the one. Imani's gaze finally met his, her eyes steady and unwavering. "Why? So you could manipulate the situation. So you could use my relationship with him to your advantage." She paused, letting the words sink in, before continuing. "The Malik I knew would have the one who told me I was holding him back. The one who saw me as static. I know that man. And I know he would have tried to use Julian to get ahead." The sting of her words hit him like a slap. For the first time in a long time, Malik couldn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She was right. His mind had always been focused on the game, on the climb, on winning at all costs. But now, it felt as though he had nothing left to fight for. Imani slid a small velvet box across the table to him. The simple, elegant engagement ring, the one he had given her all those years ago, lay inside. Malik stared at it, the reality of what it symbolized hitting him full force. That ring wasn't just a promise, it was a dream, a vision of a future that he had completely destroyed. "Take it," Imani said, her voice calm. "I never wanted to hold on to it. It's yours. You told me to sell it when we divorced. I didn't. I kept it hoping, I suppose, that I could find a way to forgive you. But I don't need it anymore." She stood up, her movements graceful and composed. A woman fully in control of her own life now. "Julian isn't vengeful, Malik," she said, her eyes softening with a trace of sympathy. "He's a builder. He doesn't tear things down just for the sake of it." What he said at the gala, it wasn't personal, it was just business, but to you, everything's personal. And that's the problem. Imani turned to walk away, but paused at the door. She looked back at him, her gaze lingering for a moment. "I'm closing this chapter, Malik," she said quietly. "I'm not angry anymore, but I don't need to hold on to any of this, including you." And with that, she walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Malik sitting there, alone. Surrounded by the ghosts of everything he had once held dear, Malik sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the ring in the box. He had nothing left to fight for, nothing left to prove. His empire had crumbled. His wealth and status were meaningless. And the one woman who had ever truly cared for him was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of loss, loneliness, and regret. Malik moved through his days like a ghost, watching his world of luxury and prestige slip through his fingers. He had once believed that success, money, and power would fill the emptiness inside him. But now, all those things felt hollow. He sold the penthouse, the one that had once looked down over the city as his kingdom, to cover mounting debts, the cars, the suits, the lavish lifestyle that had been his armor. All of it vanished in an instant. The Tom Ford suits he had worn with such pride were sold off. The sports car he had once loved was repossessed. He found himself in a small, modest apartment in Oak Meadows, a far cry from the high-rise penthouse he had occupied in the past. The balcony didn't overlook a glittering cityscape, but a communal pool that was drained for half the year. It was a place of quiet, of anonymity. And it was here that Malik was forced to confront the truth. He wasn't the powerful man who had once ruled over the boardrooms of Bravestone anymore. He was just another man trying to survive, trying to rebuild the fragments of his shattered self. And it was a painful, humbling process. One day, after a long shift at his new job, a far cry from the executive corner office he once had, Malik walked down the narrow hall of the office building. His shoulders slumped in exhaustion. He passed by the crowded break room, and overheard the voices of his colleagues, laughing and joking. The sound didn't sting as much anymore. Instead, it felt like a reminder that the world continued to turn, with or without him. He was just another man now. No longer the ambitious titan who had conquered the financial world. He had been brought low, and the hardest part wasn't the job he now had, but the fact that he had to face the man he had become. A man who had traded real connections for hollow victories. And yet, in the silence of his new life, Malik began to realize something. The work was hard, the days were long, but there was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He spent his evenings on the couch. The once grand lifestyle replaced by the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. He cooked simple meals, read books, and slowly began to understand the value of things he had taken for granted. It wasn't the world he had envisioned for himself, but it was the world he needed. Meanwhile, across town, Imani Rhodes had found something far greater than Malik ever could have imagined. She had married Julian Westbrook, in a quiet ceremony under the Tuscan sun, surrounded by only a handful of people who truly mattered to her. It was a ceremony that spoke to the simplicity of her newfound life. There were no extravagant displays, no flashing cameras. Just the two of them, vows exchanged beneath an ancient olive tree. Imani was now the director of the Art and Culture Division at the Croft Foundation, an organization she had always dreamed of running. She wasn't just writing checks to museums and artists, she was actively creating programs, scholarships, and initiatives to uplift young artists from underserved communities. She had become a voice for those who had been silenced, a champion for those who had long been overlooked. Her life was filled with meaning, purpose, and, most importantly, the freedom to define her own worth. She wasn't bound by anyone's expectations but her own. She had become a force in the art world, not as a reflection of someone else's vision, but as a creator of her own. One quiet evening, as Imani and Julian sat together in their living room, reading side by side, Julian looked over at her. There was no question in his eyes, just the steady love and respect he had for her. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Imani paused for a moment, her thoughts drifting back to Malik, to the man she had loved once, the man she had tried to save. But that was a long time ago. Now, the past felt like a book she had read and closed. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with anger. More like a character from a story I read long ago. A man who was so afraid of being ordinary, so terrified of being real, that he never learned how to be truly extraordinary. Her voice softened. He thought value was something you could put on a balance sheet, something you could measure. But what he never understood was that the most valuable things in life are the ones that don't have a price. Imani leaned, her head against Julian's shoulder, the peace of their quiet life surrounding her like a warm embrace. The past, the years with Malik, were just that. The past, she had found a new horizon, a new path. And she was walking it, side by side with the man who had seen her for who she truly was. For Malik, the journey ahead wasn't clear. He had no grand plans, no goals, no empire to build. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to chase anything. The road to rebuilding himself wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a flashy comeback. It was simple, humble. A quiet acceptance of the man he had become. And in that quiet acceptance, he began to find his way again. As time passed, Malik's name slowly faded from the pages of corporate magazines, and Imani's became synonymous with power. Not for the public image, but for the quiet, meaningful work she did. She was no longer Malik's ex-wife. She was no longer anyone's second choice. She was the author of her own story.